On July 27, 2021, inside the Ariake Gymnastics Center in Tokyo, Simone Biles vaulted, and something was wrong. She landed short of her intended position, absorbing the impact in a way that gymnastics coaches immediately recognize as a warning sign. She walked to the side of the floor, spoke briefly with a trainer, and then withdrew from the team final. The arena went quiet. The broadcast teams scrambled, and within hours, the entire world had an opinion about a decision they did not fully understand. What happened in that building on that night is a story about mental health, yes. But it is also a story about a medical condition that most people had never heard of, a sport that asks its athletes to do things that are objectively dangerous, and a culture that had spent years consuming an athlete's brilliance without ever asking what it cost her. And it is a story that does not end in Tokyo. It ends in Paris 3 years later, with 4 medals and the greatest individual performance in Olympic gymnastics history by an athlete who had been told, in some corners of the public conversation, that she should have pushed through. She did not push through in Tokyo. She was right not to. And if you want to understand why and what she did instead, stay with me. Like and subscribe if you're new here. I cover women's sports with the same depth the athletes deserve. Hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. Simone Biles is not simply the best gymnast alive. She is, by every measurable standard, the greatest gymnast in the history of the sport. She has 37 world championship medals, more than any other gymnast, male or female, in history. She has won 7 Olympic medals. She has had 4 skills named after her in the gymnastics code of points, meaning she performed them first in competition, at a level no one had done before, and the sport's governing body enshrined them with her name. The Biles 2, the Yurchenko double pike, the Cheng. She is not on the level of other gymnasts. She operates in a different category, and she was 24 years old when she walked to the edge of the Tokyo competition floor and made the decision that would define her public reputation for the next 3 years. The twisties. If you've never heard the term, you need to understand it before you can understand anything about Tokyo. The twisties are a loss of spatial orientation that occurs mid-air during gymnastics. When a gymnast performs a twisting skill, a skill that takes her off the ground at speed, rotates her through multiple axes simultaneously, and requires her to land with precision on a surface she cannot see, her brain and her body need to be communicating perfectly. The twisties happen when they stop. When a gymnast is mid-air and suddenly does not know where she is in space, does not know which way is up, cannot locate the floor. At the speed and height at which Biles operates, a skill with the twisties is not a missed routine. It is a potential catastrophe. Landing on your neck, landing wrong on a vault and blowing out a knee, or worse. Biles had experienced the twisties in training before Tokyo. She had experienced them in competition in Tokyo. She said so publicly. She described the feeling of performing a vault and suddenly realizing, mid-air, that her body had not completed the rotation she intended. She landed, assessed what had happened, and made a calculation. In gymnastics, the calculation is, can I do this without hurting myself or someone else? Her answer, on the skills she had planned to perform, was no. And so she withdrew. The criticism was swift. Commentators with no gymnastics background, no understanding of the twisties, and no apparent interest in acquiring either, declared that she had let her team down, that she was weak, that an Olympic champion should push through. And none of them acknowledged the basic fact that they were criticizing an athlete for refusing to perform a skill she could not safely perform, a skill that, done wrong, could have killed her. What they were actually criticizing was not weakness. It was precedent. For decades, the culture of elite sports, gymnastics specifically, but not exclusively, had operated on the assumption that athletes owed their bodies to the competition. That showing up and competing regardless of condition was what separated champions from everyone else. The phrase push through assumes that what is on the other side of the barrier is something worth pushing through for. In Biles' case, what was on the other side of the barrier was a real possibility of a catastrophic injury in front of a global audience. She chose not to push through. And in doing so, she made visible something that athletes have been quietly carrying for as long as elite sport has existed: that there is a limit, and that the people watching from the outside have very little understanding of where that limit actually is. There is something else that never appeared in most of the coverage. In January 2018, Simone Biles had publicly disclosed that she was a survivor of abuse by Larry Nassar, the USA Gymnastics team doctor who had been convicted of abusing more than 300 women and girls over 3 decades. She had been abused as a teenager during the very years she was becoming the dominant force in her sport, by the man who was supposed to be responsible for her physical well-being. She had competed at the Rio 2016 Olympics carrying that. She had won 4 gold medals carrying that. And she had come to Tokyo, with a pandemic year in between, with no fans in the stands, with the entire world waiting to watch her perform, carrying that. The public conversation about her withdrawal in Tokyo largely ignored this context. But her decision, when understood fully, is not a story about a gymnast who couldn't handle the pressure. It is a story about a person who had already survived more than most of her critics could imagine, who finally said, "This is enough." Biles competed in one event in Tokyo, the balance beam. She adjusted her routine to remove the most dangerous twisting elements, performed what she could do safely, and won bronze. Her teammates, competing without the most dominant gymnast in the sport's history, won silver in the team final. Sunisa Lee won gold in the individual all-around. The American team competed and competed well. And Biles, who had been the most scrutinized athlete at those games before her withdrawal, spent the rest of the Olympics watching from the stands, supporting her teammates, and dealing with the reality that the world was talking about her. She took time away from competition after Tokyo. In May 2023, she returned to competition at the US Classic, her first competition in 2 years. She performed a Yurchenko double pike, a vault so difficult that no woman had ever successfully performed it in international competition. The element had been submitted to the International Gymnastics Federation for inclusion in the code of points before Tokyo. The FIG had scored it lower than Biles's team believed it merited, prompting discussion that the governing body was deliberately suppressing her advantage, that the sports rulebook was being adjusted in real time to contain what she could do. She performed it anyway. She then went to the World Championships in Antwerp, where she won 4 gold medals and a silver, and reminded anyone who needed reminding that the intervening years had not diminished what she could do. Paris 2024 was different from any Olympics Biles had competed in before. She was 27, an age at which gymnasts have typically been retired for years. She was competing not as a prodigy or a favorite, but as someone who had survived, rebuilt, and chosen to return. And she was competing with something she had not always had, a life outside the gym. She had married NFL player Jonathan Owens in 2023. She had given interviews in which she talked, with remarkable directness, about therapy, about the Nassar case, about what it had taken to come back. She competed in Paris not as a person defined by gymnastics, but as a person who had decided, on her own terms, to compete in gymnastics again. What she did in Paris is simply one of the great individual performances in Olympic history. Team Gold, with teammates Jade Carey, Jordan Chales, Sunisa Lee, and Hesley Rivera, the United States won the gymnastics team final. Individual all-around gold, vault gold, balance beam silver, 4 medals. The gold in the individual all-around made her the oldest all-around champion in Olympic gymnastics history. The coverage was global, and in the moments after each medal, the cameras found her face, not performing, not projecting, just there, absorbing what she had done. There is a line Biles has used to describe what she wants people to understand about her career. She has said, in various ways and in various interviews, that she competes for herself, not for the crowd, not for the country, not for the sport's governing body. For herself. That sounds simple. For an athlete who has been public property since she was a teenager, who grew up inside a system that was later found to have enabled abuse on a massive scale, who withdrew from the most watched sports event in the world and spent 2 years hearing what other people thought that meant, for that athlete to stand in Paris in 2024 and compete on her own terms is not a small thing. The conversation Biles started in Tokyo about mental health, about the limits of athletic bodies, about what we actually owe the athletes we consume, is still happening. Young gymnasts talk about it. Coaches talk about it. The IOC has commissioned research on athlete mental health that it did not commission before. None of that would have happened if she had pushed through. She did not push through. She came back, and the story she left behind in Paris is one that will be taught to gymnasts for as long as the sport exists. There is a story on your screen right now about how the system that shaped Biles, the one she carried on her back to Tokyo and out the other side, was finally held accountable. Click on it. I'll see you there.